Hello, everyone. It's Dina at the Realize Foundation, and today I have a special guest, and her name is Heather, and I'm going to let her tell us more about herself. Welcome.
Thank you, Dina. I'm Heather. I am a certified life coach and a registered nurse and an author. And my coaching is specific to people that have been in religious situations where the religion has created some harm for them, and they're just like they're shuffling through the confusion of like what's healthy and what's not, and the understanding of God in the trauma of being pressured in toxic environments by religion. And so that's kind of my focus in my coaching.
Yeah. I'm curious right off the bat about how nursing fits into what you do that you just described. And does nursing have a connection to that, or is it totally separate?
I think part of it is just because I care about helping people. Like at a deep level, I really care about people's healing,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just physical, mental, the whole body.
Yeah. Well, I want you to dive in and tell us your story.
Okay. Um, so a little bit of backstory. I had a pretty good, stable home. It wasn't without some trauma. There were a couple incidences of sexual abuse as a child by church members that I knew and trusted. Um, I had 3 childhood friends die in a drowning. Um, when I was a teen, my father broke his neck in a skiing accident and became a quadriplegic for 5 years, which was a huge strain on our family. I was his caregiver, and my mom was his nurse for a lot of that time. He had other complications along with it, with a degenerative back disease, which created problems with the corrective surgeries that he had to have multiple surgeries. And so even with physical therapy, there was no chance of any return of his muscle, because by the time the 3rd surgery happened, there was like no connection between the spinal cord um, above and lower. It was a complete sever. So he was a full quadriplegic. He was on a ventilator at night. It was really hard for our family, really hard time for me, and understanding why a loving God would allow such a situation. Just watching my dad suffer in pain every day and not being able to do the things that he loved. He was a very outdoorsy, active person before that happened. And it created some bitterness in me. And it was my first real season of like really questioning God. And um, and and I was starting to have some struggles with like an eating disorder at that time. I got suicidal. Um, I um, I was in a really dark place. I had to quit college for a while because it was so bad. I was actually in that time period. I was going to school full time. I was working part time and then going home on the weekends to take care of my dad and just running myself ragged. And and it was hard. Um, my mom was super stressed out and she needed lots of help, and it just was a very anxious and tense environment even at home. To even I felt guilty for even taking space for myself, because there was so much on my mom's shoulders. Um, and so I bent over backwards in trying to help her, and then finally I had to say, okay, I've had enough. My mental health is going really bad. I don't even want to live anymore. And I'm struggling with this eating disorder, and I feel all alone. I don't have any friends. I have no social life. Um, so I had to set some boundaries. And that was one of the hardest things I had to do, because I don't think up until my dad's death, he ever understood why I had to set those boundaries. And it broke my heart, because up until that point, I was like a daddy's girl. Like we had this amazing relationship and amazing connection together. And it was heartbreaking to not have him understand that I couldn't hold what I was doing for their help any longer without falling apart myself. And so when I set those boundaries, I started getting healthier. But there was always a rift there that I felt that never got quite healed before he died. And it was heartbreaking. I mean, he was still a good man and he still loved me, but I just felt like there was just a loss of connection that was really heartbreaking for me. And unfortunately, during that time, I started falling in love with a young man who had worked for my dad. And so he was coming and visiting my dad a lot. And I had been told not to jump into love too quickly after everything that was going on with my dad. But I figured, this guy, he's a Christian, he loves God, it's going to be okay. And God can fix anything and do anything and make it work. And I feel like, this is God's answer to prayer, that this man is coming in my life at this time. And so we fell in love, and before my dad died, he asked for my hand in marriage. We got married, and right after our marriage, there were a few little signs that I was like not sure about, but of course I talked them away. Oh, this is normal. It's just, he's only human, have grace, but just little hints that there was some like lack of care for me at certain times, and even some resentment about my closeness to my dad and my grieving process with what was going on. And but I brushed those aside. I'm like, oh, he doesn't understand because it's not his dad or whatever. And but then after we got married, I started picking up on more things. Things shifted very quickly. Certain plans that we'd had for long-term plans of being like missionaries or traveling abroad and doing all of these things together kind of fell by the wayside. And he started pressuring me into doing more work and trying to earn more money so he can buy a house and settle down. And I felt a little confused by that, but I kind of went along with it. I was like, okay, loving wife needs to submit. Don't create waves, keep the peace. And I kept telling myself all these things that I had learned to be a good Christian, godly wife. And but every time I did have an opinion, for whatever reason, it was a trigger to him. And I felt like I started losing myself. Like there was no space for me to be my own person. And then I started having this confusion that, okay, how much of me do I give to make this relationship work? Because I feel like to submit to this is like, I don't have any of me left. Like I have to be what he wants me to be to make this work all the time. And, but so when I did start having my own opinions and start trying to set boundaries, it would create like these rifts where he would have these moments of rage, or just like this tense silence where, he wouldn't talk to me about anything for days, or it would be just like superficial. And it started to scare me. It's like, this isn't normal, but I don't know, what to do about it. So I started reading all these like Christian marriage books and Christian like relationship books, and trying to do all these things that they said to do. And nothing seemed to be working. The raging kept going on, and just these cycles. And I actually learned about the cycle of abuse in nursing school, but and I was like, wow, that sounds like my marriage, but he doesn't hit me, so it doesn't seem like that's abuse. And I didn't know a whole lot about abuse really until I started counseling, which was a little bit later. I was like, okay, well, I was so indebted to like making this work because I had grown up where divorce wasn't allowed. And so I was like, okay, like I was praying like head over heels, and reading scripture, just like, okay, God, you got to make this work because you said you don't like divorce, and like all this like mental teaching that I had learned, that I was just trying so hard to make it work and have God make it work. And then finally I had this friend call me up, and we had been good friends for many years, and she started confiding into me about some of her marriage issues. And I started like thinking, wow, how come I understand what she's going through so well? And it sounds so horrific when she's going through it, but I'm like understanding it so well. And it started making me think about like pay attention more to what was going on in my marriage, because by this time we'd had kids, and I could see how certain things was affecting them, with like the tension in the home and the raging, and how they would become despondent or cry and come running and be terrified of what was going on. And there was no understanding, because he would explode at the drop of a hat. I remember one time my son was coming down the stairs from his bedroom singing a hymn of all things, and my ex just lost it completely, and he took him aside, and he just like started yelling and ranting at my son, "Don't you be singing, because I was on the phone, and you should know better than to be singing so loud." And my son had no idea that his dad was on the phone. Otherwise, he probably would have been respectful and not done that. And my son was just in tears. My daughter was in tears. And that was just one incident. And there was multiple like that on the daily. And so I had to take them outside and tell them that was not a normal, healthy behavior, and when I started having to do that to my children, to tell, like, it was really hard, because like my mind was like, you got to support their dad all the time. You got to be supportive and make excuses for him. And I was like, I can't do this, because I don't want my kids to think this is normal and healthy and a way to do life and relationships. And so I decided to call a counselor and start counseling at that point, because I wanted to make the relationship work, and I wanted him to be healthy, and I wanted me to be healthy. And I blamed myself that, things weren't working too, because I wasn't a good enough Christian wife or whatever. That was kind of my mindset back then. And when I started counseling, the first thing my counselor said was like, you're basically in an abusive marriage. And I didn't want to believe him. So I started pursuing other counselors as well, and they all ended up saying the same thing. And it was just a hard realization for me. And so I still wanted me to be the problem, because if I can fix me, then the marriage can be fixed, right? But so I spent another year working on myself to try to fix the marriage, and still nothing changed. It still got worse, and I couldn't get him to do counseling, especially early on. After I separated, he did eventually do a little bit of counseling, but it didn't last. And he was always trying to pull me away from my counselors, which was kind of a red flag for me too. So with the counseling, I finally realized that no matter how hard I work on myself, he's not going to take responsibility for his part. It's not going to change him. And so I finally had to take the kids and leave, because it was affecting all of us. The tension in the home was just like unlivable. I had come to a point where I didn't want to live anymore. And I had started to believe that, I would be better off without the kids, or the kids would be better off without me, because they'd have my life insurance policy if I could, commit suicide, right? It was just horrible. The thoughts that were going through my head, very dark. And I was blaming myself for the situation, saying, okay, if I'm causing this distress in this marriage, then without me, everything will be better. All these things coming through my mind. And thankfully I was in counseling at the time, and my counselor was like, no, it's not you. Don't continually blame yourself. Like, yes, we all have problems and we all have things we need to work on, but you're having awareness about those things and you are trying to work on it. But the other party is not right now. And so right now we just need to like separate you guys for safety, and then let's see how things go. And I was terrified to separate because I knew my church's community stance on divorce was largely not accepting of it. I mean, there were a few cases where they would like, it would be okay, like, adultery or proof of abuse or anything like that. But it was all like psychological and mental abuse mostly. He did get quite physical with the kids at times, which scared me. But anyways, I was terrified to leave because I knew it would disrupt our whole church community, which we're both longstanding members in our church. Both of our families, like as children, we had grown up in the church and known each other. We were well known by all the people there, and it was going to be a huge fiasco if I had left, because I hadn't really told a whole lot of people what was going on. I had been trying to cover for it, trying to fix it, make sure, we looked good when we went to church, and because we're supposed to be a good example for everybody else, right? And so I had this mindset, and I was failing it. And now it was going to go public when I left. And I felt bad because it would make him look bad. And I was, my mindset was that I wasn't supposed to make him look bad as a good Christian wife. But I knew that I was not getting any healthier for myself or my kids. And so I finally had to leave, and my mom thankfully was aware of what was going on and lent me a place to stay for a little while at her house with the kids. And that began my long, very lonely healing journey. A lot of people misunderstood me, and I understand where they were coming from because I had that same mindset before. In my Christian upbringing, I realized that there was a lot of teachings that had kept me stuck in the abuse, and I couldn't expect them to see it because they hadn't gone through a similar experience. But at the same time, I felt it was so important to make people aware of how there are certain teachings in certain Christian environments that actually help support the abuser and further harm the one that's being abused, just because of how it's projected on couples. Just for example, certain things like certain male headship teachings, if the abuser is controlling or dangerous and a wife has to submit to that, that's super toxic for the family. And like the wife submission, forgive and forget. Oh, let's just go with the clean slate and pretend none of that happened. Unconditional love. All of those teachings, like, they have good principles behind them, but if they're projected in the wrong way in an abusive situation, it can be so destructive because it's very one-sided. Like, the person that's trying to fix the relationship is doing all these things already to try to fix the relationship and make it better, when the person that is abusing is usually being like entitled. They consider themselves entitled to those things. And so it's just feeding that entitlement rather than changing them or being a good example to them. And I mean, there are probably cases where those things are helpful and they do work, but it's only going to work if both parties are willing to do work on both of those, both of themselves, and not be trying to control what the other person is doing, but they're both willing to like be super aware and connected with the parts of them that are toxic and like working on those things. And so I actually wrote a book about this called Narcissistic Religion, which takes a lot of those teachings that were used on me that I used on myself. A lot of it, you know, some of the like religious trauma can be our own, the way we mentally put pressure on ourselves using religious teachings that we've been taught to stay in toxic situations like I was doing. And then it was compounded with what other people were telling me too. But I take a lot of those teachings and I use principle and some scripture to say, okay, in light of a loving God that is interested in our healing, this is how this teaching should play out in like an abusive situation per se, rather than making it just a rule and putting blinders on to how that rule is playing out in situations. Because sometimes there are rules like no divorce or wife submission or male headship that are just played out with your blinders on. It's going to cause harm in certain situations where there's an unequal control or power that's going on. So that's my story, and I'm still in it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's really, I know how hard it is especially when you're first sharing things like that are public. I mean, I spent 23 years hiding my suicide attempt, so I know how hard that can be to speak up, and I appreciate you sharing. I think that you're right. There are some things in the Bible that can be misinterpreted in many ways, and if people are not, some of us can go to the same church and read the same Bible, and we have very different views about it.
Very true.
And so I think that's part of it, because it's how people interpret it for themselves. And I think that God is good, and that if we can really understand it from his perspective, it's good.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's some people who twist it to what they want to believe because they don't have that connection. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it could also be that what I've learned through this journey with this nonprofit is that there are people who seem to be hurting other people. And what's really going on is they're not dealing with some kind of trauma in their life. And so they have a distorted view of things, or they just have pain from a long time ago that they haven't dealt with, and they don't understand how it's affecting them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't know that that's the case, but I'm just saying I've talked to a lot of people, including myself, who have had situations like that, where you're carrying things around in your body that you don't realize are affecting you.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that plays into your story, but
yeah, no, actually one of the biggest like emphases I have in my book is like finding healing for yourself, because that's what is actually most helpful for the world around you, is finding that healing. And I try to put in a perspective of like when things are going in a toxic direction, let's look at what the healing steps are for you to take, rather than like this. Oftentimes, like in certain religious environments, you've got this like tightrope of right and wrong, and they're terrified to go either way to make a mistake. But let's change the paradigm to more let's find what's healing and let's move that direction.
Yeah, it's true. It's not always easy, but
It's
it's
not
true.
always black and white.
And I think writing, as you probably know, since you wrote a book, is very healing. And the people who come to write in our Scars to Stars books really leave with, most of them tell me like, this is, they come and say, I'm going to write my story to help someone else. And they don't realize how much it's going to help them. And so I always tell people, if you're dealing with trauma or depression or whatever it is, if you can even write in your own notebook and journal or whatever and write about those thoughts, it gets them out of your head.
Yeah.
And there was one of our authors who was a retired firefighter who had had a really life of abuse and stuff. And he said to me one time, he said, Dina, when you write things down, it's just words and it doesn't hurt anymore. And I thought that was profound because I never thought of it that way, but it made sense because when I finally started journaling in the pandemic time, I really did get to process a lot of stuff for myself from 25 years earlier that I hadn't processed. And I was in a relationship that was not the same situation as you, but similar. And it was just very toxic. And it's like, I think we want to be the fixers. We want to be the, like, I can fix this. I can make it better. And it's not always just up to us, it's, and the emotional abuse is exactly the same situation that I had. And I think it's something you don't even realize at first. It goes on and you're wondering, why do I feel so crappy about this?
Exactly.
And then you finally figure out what's going on, and it's, I don't know, it was really hard for me because it was somebody I'd known my whole life, and
Same.
our
Yeah.
families were friends, and like,
Mhm.
just like you're talking about, and it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's hard. And it's hard to even now I struggle to put words to exactly what went on sometimes. It was just this psychological mess that it created. And it's confusing when you're in it.
Mhm. Because you do care about each other,
Yeah.
And you think, I don't know, I wrote a chapter in our book 4 called Addicted to Approval.
Mm.
And I think it explained a lot from my whole life about why I did the things I did and acted the way I did, and why I worked so hard to, prove myself to people. And it just, it's not a bad thing to have good work ethic and to, want to please people, but at what expense?
Yeah. 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 You have to be valued and a priority in there somewhere too. Otherwise you get lost in the fray of trying to please everybody else. And that's not healthy for you or
It's
anybody
true.
else at that point.
That's very true. So how old are your kids now?
I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old.
And how are they doing?
They're good. They're great people.
Awesome.
Good. Yeah.
And I think you're remarried, right?
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet. Well, congratulations on that. If I don't know, whatever the situation is. But I think it seems to be that you had a very loving family growing up, and I'm wondering if we go back to the first part of your story about the people in the church that were abusing you in whatever way. Is that something that anybody else knew about? Like, did your parents know about that, or how did that? I don't know if you want to talk about that, but
No, that's okay. Yeah, there were a few people that were basically telling me to, like, I had one person tell me that Jesus didn't stand up for his rights, so nor should you, basically. Or you can't get remarried now that you've left him. Or just like, God hates divorce. Why are you even considering that? You should be working harder on the marriage. Go back and fix it, or just stay unmarried. Or, you know, they just had answers for my life that, and it's a lot easier to give answers than to listen and work through the hard stuff. And so, I mean, it was hurtful to get those comments. And especially the people, I mean, I understand that they loved him too. And I was trying to have compassion and grace for that. But at the same time, I couldn't be subjected to that all the time, because I was struggling with my own thoughts of like guilt and shame for leaving the marriage too. And I was like, I have to leave, because this is too painful for me, because it's hard enough as it is to get out of something like that, and then have all that outside and internal pressure saying I have to go back because it's the right thing to do, when I knew that being there was something very not right. And so I had to leave and move away, to actually regain a place where I could find my own mental health again, and work on myself, and try to fix those things that actually got me into the cycle too. So,
well, I'm glad that you could do that, and that your kids are doing well.
Yeah, I mean, we're still human, and we still have our struggles, and we still have lots to work on, but we're all a work in progress. And I think actually that's the healthiest place to be, is to always realize that there's space to grow no matter where you're at.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how was it writing the book?
That was actually, in some cases, it was incredibly like freeing to just get it out on paper. And it was honestly some of my own therapy to write some of those things down as I was going through it, because it would like make it more concrete. Like, oh yeah, this is real, what's going on. And this needs to be addressed. And I feel like when I was waking up and having more awareness of like some of the damage some of these teachings were creating, and like learning to work through them, and realize that there can be a loving, healing God on the other side of this, and like moving forward with that perspective, helped me realize that I feel like this book needs to be public, because I feel like it's an important awareness to make everybody aware of what these teachings can do if they're projected wrong in abusive situations. And so that's why I published my book. But for me, it was a healing process, and it was very difficult at times too, actually recognizing how entrenched I was in ways of thinking that were harming me, that I had no idea that were harmful until I was in my situation. And I had actually pressured other people prior to that with some of those teachings. And now I regret that, because I was like, oh my gosh, I probably did my own share of damage with some of these beliefs.
Well, you know, when we grow up believing something or being taught something, we think the people who are teaching us know what they're talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
You know, when you're young, you don't question people of authority. And, you know, I think that the Bible is a document, a historical document that gives us a lot of context and advice, but it's left to interpretation for everybody.
Yeah,
And
I really
there are people that are in authority places that maybe understand it differently than someone else.
right.
I'm not saying anybody's wrong. I mean, I don't know. I think the Bible is a document that I read all the time and study, and I've been taught all that stuff my whole life, and some of it I still don't understand. So it's a beautiful wonderful document, but it's very interpretable.
Yeah, it can be misused in a power struggle situation, or I mean, in every situation, every person's individual situation is so different and so nuanced that you can't like create like take one teaching and like apply it the same way in every situation. It just doesn't work that way because we're all so different and our situations are so different, and it's everybody's personal responsibility and right to seek out truth for themselves, I believe.
Yeah,
And
I would agree with that. I think
and
yeah. I mean, just like there's been a huge conversation in my family and people around me for years about the rapture. Like how are you supposed to interpret that? And there's a lot of different theories about it. So how do we know what's really real? I think there's a lot of that in the realm that we're talking about, and I think it's not always cut and dry. A lot of it is, but some of it is not. I don't think we're meant to understand some of it in some instances. I don't know. That's just my own interpretation.
I agree. I personally feel like there's more mystery than knowing in terms of how big and vast the concept of God is. And if we think we have more answers than we think we don't have, then I think it puts us in a position where we could have ideas of superiority and judge people according to where we think we've arrived or whatever. And I think that's something we have to be careful of, and have an awareness about, because we all don't have a lot of answers. And I think more importantly than having the answers is listening with an open heart and with care, and being the best person we can be in the present moment, and moving toward healing and finding those avenues. And if we don't have all the answers of what's going to happen in the future and all the right answers for the moment, it's okay. I think I think a God of grace would understand that.
I do agree with you, and I think the main thing that I hear in this conversation is like, leave the judging up to God and not to us, because we're not in a place where we can judge other people for anything. Like we don't know the whole story, but God does. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we had this conversation, and I'm glad that people will get to hear it. And if they're Christians or not, I hope they learn something.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.